Hello everyone, this is Hamid Sharif, and in today's video we'll be discussing two of the most famous writing approaches, the product approach and the process approach, and we'll try to see the differences between both of them and how to organize a class based on any of them. Now, before we start, first we will need to discuss the meaning of both of them, or what do we mean by a product approach and what do we mean by a process approach. Now, if we start with the product or model approach, it has two names, either product or model approach. And we will understand why it's called product or model approach in a second. It was first developed in the late 70s and early 80s, so it's a little bit old. It has been there for a long time and it's still used till now. It's normally centered around the use of a model text, and this is why it's called the product or the model approach. We need a model text so that students will use it to create their own text at the end, some sort of imitation, or it could be also called as copying, but with their own ideas as well. Normally, these texts are not authentic. ما بيبقوش authentic, ما بيبقوش something that was created for real life use. تبقى حاجة created for the classroom. It's not authentic, but it normally provides a very clear model of a certain type of text. عشان احنا لما بنحب الستودنتس يكتبوا حاجه معينه فبنبقى عايزين نوريهم موديل للتكست بالظبط هيمشي ازاي الاورجنايزيشن the paragraphing and so on. فبالتالي لما هم produce their own essay or paragraph they have a model to follow. And then one of the most important parts that this text will be read and there will be attention drawn to the genre, the type of the text, the language, the features, everything, so that they can use it later on. And of course, we will have many controlled and less controlled exercises based on some of the language in the text. We might focus on linking devices. We might focus on the vocabulary used, the ideas, the organization, or the content of the text. And then, of course, at the end, learners will go to produce similar texts themselves. They would normally use the language they practiced, the language you introduced, and the organization, the linking devices, in case you're focusing on such academic skills, and they will produce their own essays or letters at the end. Of course, it's still very popular nowadays in different course books, and there will be a separate video in which we show different course books and how they tackle writing and how you can use them to benefit your students. So the whole idea behind this product, again, in لازم يكون فيه text, and we will see how the steps go in such an approach. Now, of course, the steps can be longer or shorter based on the time you have. So let's start first with the three main steps or stages in such an approach, which is basically the pre-writing stages, writing stages, and post-writing, if we could put them as simple as that. So let's keep them in three main stages. Now, if we look at the breaking down of these stages, the pre-writing stages, we have first the lead-in, which exists in almost any lesson, just to generate interest in the topic of the lesson, not the writing task itself, just the general topic. And then because we have a text, we might need to pre-teach some vocabulary in case it's needed. It's optional. You don't have to pre-teach vocabulary. In case students need it, then we pre-teach quickly, and then we move to the text itself or the reading that we have. And in this one, giving them reading for just is not always enough. هنبقى محتاجين نديهم tasks for specific or detailed understanding as well. لأن لو ما عملناش كده, reading for just is very quick and it doesn't allow students enough time to examine the text and go through it and so on. So it's very important to provide just and specific or detailed understanding tasks. Or you can set the task, set the scene, and move to the specific or detailed understanding quickly, in case you're running out of time or in case you have limited time. Now, if we move on after the reading, after we have finished the reading, and then we move on to the next step, which is basically what we call the genre analysis, in which we focus on content and language. Now, what do we mean by genre analysis? Let's imagine, for example, that we're teaching how to write an email complaint. So this genre, this type of writing has its own specific language and its own content. So we need to focus with the students, like what should we include, or what we should include, what we should add, what we shouldn't add, whether it's going to be formal or informal. All of these are focused on in the journal analysis. And again, there will be separate videos tackling this area in specific because it can be a little bit challenging. And then so after we have finished all of that, we can move to the planning stage, in which students plan for the writing. And in this one, we brainstorm ideas about the writing task, the organization, and which language to be used. We give students time to decide, and we just draw their attention that they can use ideas from the text they have read, they can use the language and everything we talked about in the journal analysis, so they can plan everything correctly. Of course, after they finish the planning, we give them time to write, and after they finish writing, we give them time to peer correct. So they can exchange letters, they can do some error correction to each other, they can look at what we covered and tick. And one of the most important parts to focus on here is the use of a checklist. You can give them a checklist and in which they can tick whether their partner or their essay or paragraph covered these points or not. Which again can be focused on another video in case you like. So just leave me any comment about any stage that you would like more explanation of, and I'll try to cover as many as possible. So basically, if you put it like that, or as simple as that, this is what we can consider some of the steps or basic steps to approach the model task or use the model in teaching writing. Now, if we move to the process approach, it was developed by the late 1980s as a new approach to teaching writing, not opposing, it's like something that as an improvement for teaching the writing process, and it was called process writing. It normally emphasizes the creativity and unpredictability of writing, because unlike the product approach, in this one, we cannot expect what students will write. In the previous one, we might have some expectation because they already have a text, which might help them in the writing process. It also focuses in developing the composing process. So it's more about the process itself. It's not about the product. It's not about the writing at the end. It focuses more on the process itself, like generating ideas, planning, drafting, redrafting, publication, and so on. And again, we'll go through the stages of this process approach in a clear way right now. Now, if we look at this diagram, it was first created by White and Arndt for the process writing, and as you can see, it's a continuous process of writing, evaluation, drafting, structuring, focusing, and then redrafting, and so on. So it doesn't actually have a linear way of putting it, but it's just a process. It's just a cycle that goes on and on till the students produce their best writing inside or outside the classroom. Now, if we look at the stages of the process writing, the basic elements, first we have pre-writing stages, we have composing or drafting, we have evaluation and revising, editing and redrafting, and finally publication. And we'll see what each stage mean in a moment. Now, let's focus first on the pre-writing stages in such an approach. So first, in the pre-writing stages, we can have the lead-in. Normally in any lesson, we do have that. But if we focus more on the writing, in this stage, we need to specify the task. We need to tell students what the task is, generate ideas or collect ideas from students, brainstorm it together. And we can do this through many appropriate means, like brainstorming. We can provide them with questions. We can questionnaires. We can let them think about the reader, make notes using visuals, pictures, anything that can help students come up with ideas for the writing. It will also help. The next stage, after we have brainstormed ideas, generated interest, and so on, will be focusing, in which you identify the central idea of the text that they're going to write, the viewpoint, the purpose of the text that they're going to write, the reader, and the appropriate form, like how should it be organized. It also involves looking at selecting and ordering the ideas, which ideas will come first, which ideas will come second, and so on. So these two are very important pre-writing stages in case we are doing process writing. And again, in the focus stage, you can also focus on some of the language that might be used. So we can focus on both. content and language, organization as well. Now, if we move to composing or drafting, this is actually where students start writing. So this can be another word that means writing. So students start writing their texts. And again, remember, in process writing, they do not have a model text to follow. So it will be purely their creativity and their own work. After that, we move to evaluation and revising. And this one is somehow similar to the previous one, the product writing. So learners are encouraged to evaluate their own work and others, so they can evaluate both of them. And again, we can give them a checklist in which they can follow to be able to evaluate correctly, because we don't want them to be looking at everything, because this will waste a lot of time. They will need to think about the purpose, whether it's clear or not, whether the ideas are organized or not, whether it has a positive effect on the reader, whether something needs to be changed, and so on. And also, after students have done that, the teacher will also respond to the text, focusing on these aspects, making suggestions rather than corrections, which is very important. So let's try to make it positive in a way that we make more suggestions than we correct students. And of course, it's very important to provide formative feedback, which focuses on content rather than purely evaluative feedback, commenting on language. Like, we need to tell students whether the ideas were clear, the organization was effective, not just focus on the language used in the text. So let's put that in mind. And of course, after we have done all of that, we can focus on the language in case we need to focus on the style of writing, whether it was formal or informal, and so on. So let's keep focusing on the language to the end and focus on the actual writing in the first part of the feedback. And then, of course, we have editing and redrafting. And in this stage, learners use the ideas, the comments their peers gave them before the teacher gave them to redraft their original essay or piece of writing. So they look at their piece of writing again, and they try to improve it by editing or redrafting it. And finally, after they have edited their task, it comes the time for publication. And once they have finished it, let's try to make it a little bit public, so a lot of people can read it. Maybe other students or most of the students in the class can read it. Maybe we can share it together. But this would be a very good idea to consider. Now, after we have seen the breakdown, now let's look at the steps in just a clearer form. So these are the ones we mentioned before: pre-writing, composing, drafting, evaluating, and editing or redrafting. And of course, finally, we have publication. Now, if we break them down, you will find that we have a lead-in, brainstorming and focusing, language work, and all of that can happen pre to the writing itself. And then we have the writing stage. After that, we have peer correction and feedback by the teacher, and then rewriting or redrafting, and finally publication. So these are the steps, the stages that you can follow, and these are the aims for different stages that you can also use in your lesson plans in case you're writing lesson plans. This will also help. And again, timing will differ from one lesson to another, because in one lesson you might have 2 hours for the writing, in others you have 45 minutes. So you will have to be very careful on the time allocated for different stages. Now, what are the differences and when to use each of these approaches? This is a very important question to address. Now, if we talk about the differences, there will be like 1 or 2 major differences between both of them. First, the product approach focuses on the text. The main idea in the product approach is that we have a text, we need to use it, we need to exploit it to the fullest, use the language, the organization, everything, and students can imitate. In the process approach, it emphasizes the steps involved in creating the text, which is can be a little bit more important for different learners, to teach them how to take it step by step. So this is the main difference between the product approach and the process approach. Now, if we consider what we have just said and decided when to use each of these approaches, we'll find that first, the product approach can be used with lower levels because it gives them a lot of help, a lot of guidance, because they have a text and they can use it to imitate. Now, if we think about the process approach, this can be used with both, again, lower and higher levels, but we normally use it with higher levels because it's a little bit more challenging. It promotes creativity, and it's just more suitable for higher levels. However, overall, both approaches can be used with lower or higher levels, depending on your students, their motivation, their level, and preferences. And it will be also a good idea to use them interchangeably to avoid boredom in the classroom. Now, this was a brief introduction to both approaches. I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know in a comment if you need me to explain more any of the stages that you have seen, if you would like me to focus more in any of the approaches. And next video, hopefully we'll be focusing or looking at different lessons from different course books that target writing and see how they approach it, and whether we will need to add something as teachers from outside the book as supplementary material or not. Thank you so much. This was Hamid Sharif, and I'll see you in the next videos, inshallah.